video is to show you how to make this gorgeous block. Now this block is called Broken Dishes and it's made up of 4 large half square triangles. The block will finish here at 6.5 inches by 6.5 inches. So it'll be 6 inches by 6 inches once it's sewn into your project. So I'm going to show you how to make this block right now. Now I know that some of you really struggle with half square triangles, so let's get a bit more practice in. And that is exactly what we're going to be doing here. We're going to be making 4 at a time half square triangles. Now don't panic, this process is actually really simple once you know how to do it. So you're going to need 2 pieces of fabric, both 6 inches by 6 inches in size. Ideally one really light fabric and one completely contrasting in colour. So I've got this lovely blue Liberty and this white, kind of white on white, sort of almost like a flowery print here. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to pop them right sides together. They should lay exactly on top of each other, like that. And what we're aiming to do is we're going to sew 1/4 inch away from each edge all the way around our square. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pin. You don't have to pin if you don't want to, but I really would suggest it. I still pin now every time I sew. So we're going to pop a few pins in, probably 2 on each side will be sufficient. It's really just to keep it in place while we sew around the edge. So let's add some pins. Actually, that's probably enough. 2 on each side, 2 here, 2 here. And then I'm going to take it to the sewing machine. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start about halfway along one side, because what I don't want to start in the corner, because ideally what we want to do is avoid sewing up to the edge, just to make it a little bit easier when we come to cut it in a moment. So let's take it to the sewing machine and we're going to sew it all the way around the edge. I'm not going to be using a leader this time because I'm going to be starting anywhere along this edge that isn't too close to the top. So I'm just going to kind of start here and I'm going to line it up with my 1/4 inch seam guide here and put my foot down. Now I am going to start with a forward stitch and then I'm going to do a back stitch just because we're starting halfway along. So let's do that. And my machine will automatically do a back stitch. If yours doesn't, just do a couple of stitches and a back stitch and then you can start going. So we're going to come all the way to the edge and what we want to be doing is stopping about 1/4 inch. So if I grab my ruler, we can see how warm my ruler's getting. So this line here, this kind of thicker line just below the numbers is my 1/4 inch. So I want to be stopping about here. So it's not, it's not much of a distance, but it'll just make things easier when we come to the next step. If you want to, you could draw a line or a pencil line or something, just so that you've roughly got a stopping space. And then you know to stop here. And you want to stop and put your needle down. That's the important bit here, because we're going to just pivot the fabric and we don't want to have to readjust it. So I'm going to sew down and I can see my line here and I can kind of roughly eyeball 1/4 inch if you don't want to measure. And then I'm going to stop kind of as close to it as I can. So I want my needle down. So I'm coming to the line. I can probably get, and then I'm going to put my sewing machine's got a needle down function, so I've got a button that I can press and it just drops the needle. If you don't have that, you can use your winder and just wind your needle down into the fabric. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the needle down and I'm going to lift my foot up. That leaves the fabric free to pivot, but I'm not pulling it out. So hopefully you can see that if I just move my camera. So I've lifted my foot, left the needle down, okay, and I can just pivot my fabric round, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to swizzle my fabric round and it should line back up with the 1/4 inch here, and then I'm going to start sewing and I'm going to literally repeat that all the way around the square until I get back to where I started. I'm going to take my pins out as I go. So there we go. We've sewn all the way around the edge. We've taken our pins out and we are ready for the next step. Back at our cutting table now, I have given it a quick press. I've cut off the thread that was hanging off and we've now got 2 squares sewn together, right sides together. Okay, now we're going to cut across both diagonals. Now this feels odd, but just try it and bear with me. So literally all we're going to do is we're going to take a longer ruler, one that's longer than the diagonal length, and we're going to make sure it's put on both the diagonal corners or as close to it as we can get, and you are going to cut. You're then going to move your ruler, ideally without moving your block, but if you do, that's fine. And then I want you to pop your hand on it and just twist your block around so that it's same position as it was. And then you're going to cut along the other diagonal. There we go. And you will now have 4 oversized but beautiful half square triangles. 3 and 4. So this is the 4 at a time half square triangle method. Please give it a go. I really encourage you to give it a go. Now they're going to need a bit of work. Obviously we need to press them and trim them down, and then we'll be ready to put our block together. I'm going to take this over to my iron now and I'm going to do the usual step of setting the seams. So I'm going to place my iron on top of where I've just stitched on each of these half square triangle units to set these seams. I'm then going to finger press open the seams and I'm going to be pressing these open. So let's set those seams. So I am just placing my iron on top. I am not wiggling, I'm not ironing from left to right, back and forth. I am literally just placing my iron on, holding it for a few seconds. It gets nice and hot and that will just make these lay much flatter. Okay, and I'm then going to go back to the beginning one. I'm then going to flip it over and I'm going to finger press the seam open. They're stuck together where I've just ironed them. Now, what I like to do is finger press it open like this. And then we're going to start this end. I take my iron and you're just gently but firmly going to run the iron along. Now I'm not backwards and forwardsing, I'm not being too rough, I don't want to pull these out of shape. Literally running the iron kind of just up and down, as in lifting and dropping the iron all the way along that seam. And then I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to make sure it's still open and I'm just going to do the same. And that will really help your half square triangle lay lovely and flat. So we're going to do that on all 4 of these and then we will trim them to size. Now that we've sewn our 4 half square triangle units and we've pressed them so that the seams are pressed open, we now want to trim them down, getting rid of these dog ears and just trimming them down to size, and the size will be 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches. So I'm going to show you how to do that right now. Now I use a square ruler, and if you don't have one of these I highly recommend investing in one, because they make trimming half square triangles, flying geese and kind of smaller squarer blocks much easier. So all you do is you take the diagonal line from corner to corner of your ruler and line that up with that central stitched line, and it should hit corner to corner. And what you want to do is where your 3.5 by 3.5 line is, you want to make sure there's a little bit of excess fabric all the way around. That way you're trimming a little bit off from each end. And so you're going to start with the right hand side and the top, and I'm just going to trim and trim, and you can move those bits away. Okay, and then I'm going to take my ruler off, spin the block around, pop it back down, and this time I'm making sure that I've got 3 different places lined up. So I want the diagonal line to be going along the diagonal stitch central line, and I want my 3.5 to line up exactly with this left hand edge, and this 3.5 marker to line up with this edge, and then I should have excess fabric again on my right and the top, and I'm literally going to cut and cut, and there we go. So you'll end up with a perfectly sized 3.5 by 3.5 inch square. So you're going to repeat that on all 4 of your squares, and then we're going to sew them together. This is going to be the orientation that we want. So we want them put together like this in a square, and you want your first colour to be where these blue colours are. So we're going to have 1 in each corner and then 2 facing each other, and then the second fabric that you've got is going to go in the opposite 2 corners and the opposite 2 central corners. And this is called the Broken Dishes quilt block, and it's a really, really nice one to get you practicing sewing your half square triangles. Now all I'm going to do is I'm going to flip over this one onto this one onto this one, and I'm going to sew 1/4 inch down each side, press them open, and then join the 2 rows together. So I'm going to do that now, and I'll show you what that looks like. We're going to press these slightly differently. So whereas we press these seams open, we want to be able to nest these 2 together. What I'm going to do is I'm going to press this top seam, I'm going to press this seam here to the right, and I'm going to press the bottom row, I'm going to iron this seam to the left. That way they'll be facing in opposite directions, and then I can nest them. I've now pressed this. So this one is going to the right, and this one is going to the left. So these ones remain open, and then all we need to do is nest them, because we want our centre section to all line up nicely. So the way to do that is to lay the blocks on top of one another, and they should pretty much be the same size. And then we want to try and line up the stitched line on this top block with the stitched line on the bottom block here. So the way that I do that, I lay it out like this, and then I put my finger on the seam here, and I just peel it back. Now I can see that it's slightly out, it's slightly across, so I'm just going to move my block slightly over and repeat. And you're going to keep going until when you peel the top block back, the stitch line here is directly above and kind of leads straight into the stitch line below, where you know you've got the blocks precisely on top of each other, and you're going to have a nice central seam line. So then I'm going to pop a pin across the 2 like that. And you can pin the 2 sides if you want to as well. I'm not going to bother, I'm just going to sew straight across, and then using 1/4 inch straight across. Now when you get to this centre piece and you remove your pin, you can just do a quick double check and make sure that it's still all lined up before you finish sewing it. So I've just sewn across, and let's open up, and there is our block. So you can see it's really nice and accurate in that centre. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to press this central line open once I've set the seams, just to help this centre piece lay flat, because we've got quite a few seams intersecting here. So these can stay as they are, and then I'm going to iron this one flat, and that will just help that lay flatter from the front. And that's your block done. Done. So that is the challenge completed. Your block should finish at 6.5 by 6.5. So you can measure that, trim it up, just trim away any odd bits of thread that are hanging around just to neaten your block up. But there we go, that's how your block should look.